Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. News of the kingdom's princesses attending the upcoming masquerade ball spread like wildfire, injecting a wave of excitement into the otherwise dull routine. The students began to buzz with anticipation. And not just the first years. The entire castle was abuzz. Princess Anki, the eldest, was a strong contender for the throne, beloved for both her beauty and virtue. It was no exaggeration to say that over half the boys in the castle were her admirers. Of course, admiration and love were 2 different things. The princess's confirmed attendance elevated the Christmas Eve masquerade ball to a whole new level. What was once seen as just another annual event now held a different significance. The boys started thinking about dressing more formally, more handsomely. The girls dreamed of making themselves more beautiful, hoping to rival the princesses themselves. The masquerade ball was a special occasion where even commoners could wear princess-like dresses without being criticized. Everyone wanted to feel like a princess, especially with real princesses present. How childish. Emma muttered under her breath while carefully choosing a cute hairpin. Rumor had it that the beauty shop run by the elves sold a plant essence that could temporarily straighten hair. While she liked her voluminous curls, she sometimes wanted to experiment with a different style. On the second Friday of October, the young mages found themselves with more leeway in their credits, and with the excuse of gathering core materials for their magic spirit cards. Travelers Street was bustling with energetic first years. Vert's bottom had finally stopped hurting so much, and he wandered around the 10-credit store with Robert, hoping to find some cheap but unique materials. Vert had lost 50 credits for using lust to shine it on Professor Kazel's head. Robert, though also a victim, had lost 10 credits for sneaking out at night. He kept complaining about how boring Professor Sarah was and how much nicer Sister Carrion was. Meanwhile, Dark had also arrived at Travelers Street. He restocked on some things his cat Grass liked and pondered what materials to use for Monday's magic class to craft his magic spirit card. He was growing tired of using cat Grass's fur and wanted to try something new. Perhaps a combination of rat fur and thunderstruck wood? He had heard of a magic spirit called the Lightning Rat, which, despite being only a 2-star, was incredibly fast and perfect for dodging attacks in dueling matches. For young mages who couldn't yet manipulate magic orbs from a distance, this was a cost-effective option. Another idea was combining dried chameleon lizard and transparent umbrella mushrooms, which supposedly had a decent chance of crafting a magic spirit with an invisibility skill. Such a visual advantage was undoubtedly something young mages feared, as they lacked the means to counter it. As the number of magic cards in their possession grew, it was likely that some first years would qualify to join the dueling club before Christmas. Participating in dueling matches was the proper way to earn more credits. Dark was already preparing for this. He hoped to have at least one second-tier, 4 to 6-star, magic spirit card by then. Although using Lust Eye could evolve Evie into a 4-star Umbron, its disobedience made it unusable in official matches. Indeed, even the goddess's sin couldn't compare to his own. Dark stepped into a materials shop. This shop, called Wind Traveler, was the most popular among the lower-year students on Travelers Street. First and second years with limited credits needed affordable yet decent quality shops like this. Dark looked at the dried lizards, rats, centipedes, and scorpions in the shop. Finally, it felt like he was getting a taste of being a wizard. Some of these common materials cost only a few credits, and the most expensive wouldn't exceed 100 credits. After some thought, he bought a pitch-black century-old turtle shell and some fragments of magic armor. Whether he could use them or not was another matter, but it was good to have them on hand. With Umbron out of the picture, he needed a tank-type magic spirit card to form his strategy. For example, Robert's Mystic Beast Castle was a decent type. If only its star level were higher. Then, with a strange look, he accepted a flower card from the shopkeeper as a free gift for spending over 100 credits. It seemed the shops on Travelers Street had started giving out flower cards again. Though he didn't know the reason, this was undoubtedly great news. Dark's steps became more energetic, and his enthusiasm for shopping grew. candy shops, flower shops, jewelry stores, clothing stores. Before he knew it, he had already covered half the street. Looking at the 8 additional flower cards in his hand, Dark couldn't help but grin. As the sun set, painting the sky with red hues, the streets of Travelers Street lit up with colorful lights. Dark's steps came to a halt in front of an antique shop, his eyes locked onto an item on the stall, unable to look away. The shape of the item was something he had seen in a book while researching ways to counter the 7 sins. The Hook of Fate. Legend had it that in ancient times, gods would cast fishing lines from the heavens, with a hook of fate attached, to fish for humans. The gods were the anglers, and humans were the fish. Those hooked would be taken to heaven. Although the last line in the book read, "If your soul is hooked, you naturally go to heaven." Dark had still been left with a strong impression of the hook. Aside from being covered in rust, the hook looked exactly like the one described in the book. Of course, antique shops were full of similar replicas, and thinking he could find a treasure based on a mere description was unlikely. He simply thought that even as a replica, this item held some value. "Child, what catches your eye?" An elderly man with a face full of wrinkles emerged from the dimly lit antique shop, his expression kind. Chapter 74, Dark Damon can hardly imagine 5 years later. 6. Dark didn't even bother trying to hide anything, not that he could have even if he'd wanted to. Anyone who ran a shop on Travelers Street was no ordinary person. The old man before him might have looked kind and gentle, but who knew what sort of ruthless character he could be outside this street? Dark pointed directly at the hook and asked, "Grandpa, is this the legendary Fate Hook?" The old man stroked his long beard and smiled. "It's rare for someone as young as you to recognize it. Indeed, its original form is the Fate Hook, the one that fishes for souls." Dark frowned. "Original form?" The old man nodded, picked up the rusty hook from the stall, and wiped off the dust. "Legends are legends because they're ethereal and elusive. If someone could actually hold the real thing, it wouldn't be a legend anymore, would it? This hook is just a man-made imitation, modeled after the legend." Dark nodded, still a bit confused. "Then, Grandpa, can it still hook souls?" The old man glanced at him, suddenly swung the hook forward, and shouted, "Boo!" Dark instinctively ducked, but the hook swung harmlessly over his head. The old man chuckled. No, it can't hook souls. At best, it can hook away some stray thoughts." "Stray thoughts?" Dark's interest was piqued, and he focused intently. The old man said, "Here, let me show you. Oh, by the way, what's your name?" "Dark. And you?" "You can call me Old John," the old man replied before heading into the dimly lit shop. Dark hesitated for a moment but eventually followed. Old John lit an oil lamp inside, and the light gradually illuminated the entire shop. He pulled out something resembling sandpaper from a drawer and waved it in front of Dark. "Gold polishing paper." He then rubbed the hook vigorously with the paper, and the years of rust fell away like flakes. When he stopped, the Fate Hook looked brand new. Dark was amazed. "Watch closely." Old John raised an eyebrow at Dark, then suddenly stabbed the hook into his own head and pulled it out. The front half of the hook turned into a shadow as it touched his skin, and a transparent bubble was hooked out of his mind. Pop. Old John poked the bubble, and it burst. "Ah, no more stray thoughts. Feels refreshing." He looked completely revitalized. Dark couldn't help but ask, "Can it actually extract mental substances from the brain?" Old John nodded and casually tossed the hook back onto the stall. "It's an old thing, and the quality isn't guaranteed. Besides, you can't use it yet. If it's still here by the time you're in your 5th year, I'll sell it to you." Dark's lips twitched, but he eventually left the antique shop. He knew that high-level tools like this, which interacted with the brain, required immense skill to control. It was similar to how he possessed the brain dropper but only dared to use the safest dragonfly touch method. This imitation Fate Hook was similar to the brain dropper, but while the latter could only extract 1 drop at a time, the former could hook out a whole chunk. That was far too dangerous. Hooking away stray thoughts was one thing, but if it dug too deep, it might just rip out his entire brain. 5th year, huh? Dark pondered. Will I even need it by then? After picking up a few blank magic cards and some experimental materials, Dark left Travelers Street. He still had a lingering thought about the Fate Hook, but it was just a faint one. As he entered the castle, a raindrop quietly fell from the sky. It was starting to rain. How lucky. Dark glanced back at the gathering rain clouds in the night sky and couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Over the weekend, Dark spent most of his time in either the common room or the library. He occasionally visited Travelers Street, mainly to collect flower cards, but it seemed the distributors were out of stock. He only managed to snag 3 more after circling around. Still, he wasn't discouraged. Since the flower cards had been distributed, he could always collect them from other students later. However, the cards felt unreliable, as if they might lose their effect at any moment. Relying on external tools wasn't a sustainable path. Most of Dark's time in the library was spent studying theoretical knowledge about the mind. He realized his understanding in this area was still too shallow. If he could delve deeper, he might find a more efficient way to extract more of the lust and other major sins within a month, rather than just waiting for the next month to arrive. Before he knew it, it was the third week of November. On Monday morning, Professor Sarah was still lecturing on the theory of sacrificial summoning. The students barely made it through the class, and as soon as it ended, they all perked up. Even Dark couldn't help but smile. The next class was Professor Kazel's magic theory, where they would begin crafting their second magic spirit card under his guidance. Of course, some, like Dark and Dememetis, had already made their second card. Occasionally, she would summon her second magic spirit in the library, a winged coin that excelled at pretending to be a regular coin. At 9:50, Professor Kazel arrived 10 minutes early, but the classroom was already full. He glanced at the enthusiastic students with satisfaction and clapped his hands at the door. 2 muscular figures then carried in a large box. 3 volunteers, please, to distribute the materials. Professor Kazel said after putting away his magic spirit. Emma, always seated in the front row, silently stood up. 2 other girls followed with smiles. We'll help too. Somehow, Emma's reputation had improved, and she wasn't as isolated as before. I assume none of you have forgotten? Professor Kazel stepped onto the podium after the bell rang, as gentle as ever. Today, we'll be practicing the basic synthesis method. Don't underestimate it just because it's basic. For a long time to come, this will be your most frequently used method for creating magic spirits. Now, open your textbooks and review the steps with me. As soon as he finished speaking, the classroom erupted in groans. Huh? Aren't we supposed to start crafting right away? The young mages felt like they'd been doused with cold water just as their energy was peaking. The atmosphere in the classroom plummeted. But Professor Kazel paid no attention and continued the lesson. Chapter 75, Dark Demon's Golden Noble Card. Once again, the material pack included 2 blank magic cards, each worth 10 skill points. Beyond those, however, the materials within weren't clearly categorized. In fact, the contents varied slightly from pack to pack, requiring the students to assess and decide how to use them. After half an hour of review, the lesson finally progressed to the practical application stage. Dark, already familiar with the process, moved with practiced ease, his crafting flowing as smoothly as water. He didn't spare a glance for the others for the moment, starting with mixing the Sprite Honey and Cerebral Essence fluid. Everything felt effortless, easily within his grasp. In less than 30 minutes this time, he had already reached the final step of the basic, random, refinement method. He activated refinement array number 1 and, with great concentration, began adding the ingredients. Just then, Professor Kazel happened to be standing right behind him. Diana wanted to lean in for a better look, but with the professor right there, she could only steal furtive glances. Statistically speaking, the more similar the properties of the core materials, especially those leaning towards biological origins, the higher the probability of a successful refinement. Dark stared at the core materials arrayed before him, feeling conflicted. Over the weekend, in his quest to get those flower cards, he'd ended up buying a fair amount of seemingly useless materials. Beyond the initial Centennial Turtle Shell and Magic Armor Fragment, he'd acquired bizarre items like a seashell bracelet, a snake eye, magic candy, and even a dried giant insect. He watched as the light from refinement array number 1 began to flicker erratically. Gritting his teeth, Dark decided to throw caution to the wind. Not aiming for guaranteed success this time, he started with the turtle shell and tossed in nearly all his core materials. Perhaps because most of them were indeed rather useless, refinement array number 1 accepted the whole lot without protest, swallowing everything. But just as the array's light flared to its brightest and Dark was about to breathe a sigh of relief, Professor Kazel, still behind him, suddenly interjected, "Spit into it." "Dark, huh?" Professor Kazel explained, "Human saliva contains various compounds. When you've overloaded the core materials like this, adding a bit of saliva can act as a catalyst for the refinement." Dark gave him a strange look but, swallowing his embarrassment, spat into the array. So this is one of Professor Kazel's obscure tidbits of knowledge? Awesome. In any case, after the saliva was added, the light from the refinement array changed noticeably. Over the next 30 seconds, all the materials fused and were absorbed. Then, the surface of the card began to eject impurities. Extracting the essence, discarding the dross. This was the most crucial step of the basic, random, refinement array. The last time he tried refining using cat hair, Dark had failed at this very stage, resulting in the magic card catching fire. This time, however, as various impurities were expelled, The light emanating from the magic card grew clearer and brighter, seemingly heading straight towards success. But soon enough, the card was buried under an ever-growing pile of dross. Dark stared at the small mountain of waste that seemed to have materialized out of thin air, sweat dropping. "It stinks," Diana whispered, covering her nose. Rose discreetly turned her face towards the window. Professor Kazel had already backed off a good 2 meters. The rapidly intensifying stench soon drew the attention of the entire classroom. Dark leaned back awkwardly but held his ground. "That guy's fast, just like always." Emma pouted, clearly frustrated. A large pile of ancient gold coins sat on the corner of her desk. "Did he fail?" Robert asked, mouth slightly agape. Vert shook his head. "Hard to say." On each of their desks lay the treasures they had picked up from the 10 skill point shop. Vert had actually been watching Dark the entire time, taking in everything from the pile of core materials worth hundreds of skill points, at least down to the final edition of Saliva. He then glanced at his own pile of treasures and couldn't help but feel a pang of despair. The gap between them had formed before he even realized it. Fall behind once, and you keep falling further behind. If he remained content with his current progress, the distance between them would only widen. It was like debt: the longer you left it, the more it grew. Vert gritted his teeth, then inspiration struck. If saliva works, what about hair? Or fingernails? Hair and nails from an ordinary person wouldn't work, of course. But Vert knew he was different. Could the heroic bloodline he inherited offer some advantage? Just then, the magic card on Dark's desk finally stopped its expulsion. Holding his breath, he carefully reached into the pile of dross with a pair of tweezers, extracted the magic card, and quickly rinsed it under the tap. As the surface grime washed away, a corner of the magic card gradually became visible. It faintly radiated a golden halo. Dark's hand trembled, nearly dropping the card. Although he had previously used Lust 3 to evolve his Evui into an orange card possessing 3 skills, the 2 magic spirit cards he personally owned were both standard blue cards with only a single skill. Magic spirit cards weren't just differentiated by their number of skills, they also emitted a halo of a corresponding color, easily identifiable by sight. Gold, naturally, represented a gold card. Possessing 4 skills, the nobility among magic spirit cards. Before the emergence of the truly divine god cards, these gold cards were sometimes even referred to as god cards themselves. Dark had never, ever imagined he could actually refine pure gold from a pile of worthless junk. He eagerly used a gauze cloth to wipe away the last traces of grime from the card's surface, finally getting a clear look at the magic spirit depicted. A magic spirit with a small yellow head poked out from a hard, red shell. It resembled a little imp, but its limbs were like slimy tentacles. The shell, reminiscent of a turtle's, had 8 distinct holes rimmed with white, circular ridges. Its head and limbs extended softly from some of these openings. "It's actually a golden shackle." Professor Kazel's astonished cry came from behind. "Looks like Shuckle got copied too. But shouldn't it be Shuckle Turtle?" Dark gazed at the shackle, his eyes wide with delighted surprise. This was a super tank exceeding all his expectations. Card name, Shackle. Type, Spirit card. Level, Comma race, Insect. Attribute, Rock. Magic power, 900. Attack, 0. Defense, 2200. Skills, Sturdy. Power split. Guard split. Power trick. Internal thoughts racing. I already have Evui, so what's adding a Shuckle to the mix? This kind of thing is becoming normal, isn't it? A 3-star card with 2200 defense? So what? Aren't those the expected stats for Shuckle? Lady of the White Bone is 3-star, 08 TK out of 2200 def. Giant Shield Gardna is 4-star, 108 TK out of 2600 def. Millennium Shield is 5-star, 08 TK out of 3000 def. Stuff like this is pretty common, really. And so? Dark turned around, put on his most innocent expression, and asked, "Professor, is this a particularly rare magic spirit?" Chapter 76, Vert Gold throws down the gauntlet. The professor's lip twitched, but he still explained, "Judging by the stats, the Shuckle is indeed an exceptionally rare magical spirit. To this day, no one has managed to figure out a guaranteed crafting formula for it. Its rarity mainly stems from its defense value, which is as high as 2200. That's the absolute maximum a Tier 1 magical spirit can possibly achieve." Dark nodded slightly. Typically, the peak attack or defense for a 3-star magical spirit card should be 1500. The textbooks clearly recorded the top stats for magical spirits of each star rating: 1-star, 502-star, 1003-star, 1504-star, 2005-star, 2506-star, 3007-star, 3508-star, 4009-star, 4,500. These peak stats were usually achieved by sacrificing the other corresponding stat, attack or defense. But there are always a few exceptions to every rule. Shuckle was one of them. As a 3-star magical spirit, Shuckle sacrificed far more than just its attack power. Its weaknesses were glaringly obvious: extremely slow speed and a tiny frame, standing only 0.6 meters tall, prevented it from being an effective tank. So, while Shuckle was certainly rare, its general utility wasn't considered high. However, the card in Dark's hand was a golden Shuckle. Furthermore, its 4 skills were incredibly practical: sturdy, passive skill. A magical spirit with this skill cannot be defeated in a single hit. Power split, uses psychic power to add its own attack to the opponent's, then splits the total evenly between them. Guard split, uses psychic power to add its own defense to the opponent's, then splits the total evenly between them. Power trick, uses psychic power to swap its attack and defense values. With these 4 skills, although Shuckle couldn't be a proper tank, it could become a masterful trickster. In formal duels, it was bound to become an opponent's nightmare. Naturally, Dark had no intention of revealing Shuckle's skill information. The card face of a magical spirit card only displayed 3 stats: magic power, attack, and defense. Ultimate abilities were always hidden. Professor Kazel, though curious, didn't probe further. He offered a slight smile, saying, "Dark, Lady Luck truly favors you." Dark nodded. "I think so too. Hey." After finishing the practical assignment as the expected first place, Dark began observing the crafting techniques of the other students. Perhaps due to their previous experience crafting magical beasts, the junior mages performed quite well in this class, with many successfully creating magical spirit cards. The second student to succeed after Dark was, unsurprisingly, Emma. Since Emma hadn't summoned her magical spirit in class, Dark didn't know what kind of golden beast she had actually created. The variety of magical spirits was simply too vast, many weren't even recorded in textbooks. But the most attention-grabbing student in this class was undoubtedly the hero's scion. Vert's magical spirit card crafting concluded with an explosion. As everyone turned to look, he emerged from the ashes, his face blackened by soot, stubbornly holding an intact magic card. Seemingly unable to wait to see his creation, he summoned it right there at the back of the classroom. It was actually a troll. The behemoth straightened up, nearly brushing against the ceiling. The moment it appeared, it let out a terrifying roar, as if venting frustration. Whoa! Vert wiped the grime from his face, revealing bright white teeth as he looked up excitedly. "If I'd had this earlier, in the secret passage, I wouldn't have." Robert asked in confusion, "Vert, what are you talking about?" "Nothing." Vert laughed heartily. "Check it out, isn't my troll awesome?" Robert couldn't help but pinch his nose. "Awesome or not, I don't know, but it looks kind of dumb." Vert beamed. "Isn't that just how trolls are? Brainless, powerful, and a tough hide. But who cares if it's brainless? I've got the brains, and that's enough." Robert conceded, "Makes sense." As they were talking, Professor Kazel walked over. "Gold, why would you summon a troll inside the classroom?" Vert quickly said, "I'll recall it right now." But the news that the hero's scion had crafted a troll had already spread through the entire class. Trolls were standard top-tier 3-star magical spirits, balanced in attack and defense, and frequently seen on the competitive scene. This undoubtedly gave Vert a chance to show off. Of course, compared to Vert's troll, Dark was more interested in the magical spirit Diana had crafted. It was a brown earth bear. As expected of someone from the kingdom's bear clan, she really did have an affinity for bears. Diana gleefully hugged her magical spirit card, turning around constantly to show it off. Dark could only coax her to settle down like she was a child. On the other side, Rose also managed to complete her second crafting attempt before class ended, successfully creating her own magical spirit. It was a rabbit type, similar to her magical beast, Snow Rabbit, and seemed to possess a healing-type ultimate ability. This class represented a massive step forward for the first-year students. Most of them now had their first magical spirit ready for potential use in duels. At the same time, having learned how to craft magical spirits, they could finally rely on their own abilities to purchase materials and continue crafting in the future. It could almost be said that, from this moment on, they had truly crossed the threshold into becoming proper magisters. What surprised Dark, however, happened later. After potions class ended that afternoon, Vert and Robert actually sought him out. And they issued a challenge to duel. Dark was taken aback on the spot. Although he was familiar with the school rules and knew the academy strongly encouraged formal duels between students, he still couldn't comprehend Vert's actions. Has Vert evolved into the protagonist of some power fantasy story? Dark wondered. Did he find that typical rhythm, power-up show-off and take-down rivals, power-up show-off and take-down rivals repeat? And am I supposed to be the rival getting taken down? With an odd look on his face, Dark inquired, why? He hadn't expected Vert to come prepared. Vert exchanged a look with Robert, seeming to draw strength from his close friend's eyes, and declared, I know you haven't taken me seriously since school started. Dark went, huh? Vert pressed on, no need to deny it. I can sense your attitude towards me. Dark replied, oh. Vert stated firmly, but today, I'll definitely make you understand that we stand on the same level. Dark asked, well then, do you know the rules for student duels? Vert looked puzzled. Fair, just, and public. Dark resisted the urge to facepalm. It's that you have to wager at least 100 school credits. Vert went, ah. So you just charged in here, all fired up, without knowing anything? Dark thought wryly. Duels don't come without a price. Chapter 77, Dark Demon's Compassionate Heart, 7, hold on. Vert's expression shifted, and he quickly pulled Robert into a corner. Only then did the two take out their academy cards, infusing them with magic power to check the relevant regulations. Vert whispered, what's going on, Robert? Is this for real? Does the academy actually support betting? Robert thought for a moment before replying, I'm not entirely sure, but I think I've heard a rumor. What rumor? Vert asked. Robert lowered his voice as much as possible, it seems. Our academy might be the biggest backer behind the dual tournament betting. Hiss, don't just spout nonsense. What if a professor hears you? Vert said, then sighed. Well, should we still go through with this? By the way, do you really think just showing off my strength will increase Dark's favorability towards me? Robert adopted a serious tone. Of course. Dark is the sole son of a duke, after all. Born noble, it's normal for him to have a bit of pride. Don't be fooled just because he seems somewhat approachable when he talks to us. The truth is. What is it? Vert prompted. This is something I heard from a friend of my dad's. Robert explained. People like him are actually incredibly arrogant, looking down on everyone. The reason they seem friendly is that they don't even register others as being on their level. It's like how you'd look at cats or dogs, you naturally wouldn't get angry with them. Vert was astonished. Is that really a thing? What else could it be? Robert stated confidently. How else do you explain why, after all this time, his favorability towards you hasn't budged? It just keeps fluctuating around 45? That. Vert paused. That actually makes a lot of sense. Robert continued, so, win or lose doesn't matter. As long as you display your strength, there's bound to be a change. You can't expect to unlock the 80 favorability threshold without paying some price. Well. Vert hesitated, what about the credits? Sorry. Robert admitted, I only have 68. Vert fell silent. Leaning against a wall, Dark waited for a bit. He was actually looking forward to dueling Vert. After all, the rhythm of improving strength showing off and putting others in their place was genuinely satisfying. It was also a chance to test out Shuckle's abilities. However, when Vert and Robert returned, they both looked quite awkward. Vert hesitated for a long while before finally blurting out, how about lending me 1 credit? Lend 1 credit? Dark was stunned. You only have 99 credits between you? Ha. Vert scratched his head, embarrassed. Well, you know, we use them all up buying materials. Wait, didn't you guys get your materials from the 10-credit shop? Dark thought. But, as the saying goes, life is hard enough, don't point out the harsh truths. Dark's emotional intelligence wasn't that low. He sighed helplessly. It's not like I'm unwilling to lend even 1 credit. But as soon as he said that, Vert's expression changed again. With another quick hold on, he dragged Robert back to the corner. Vert whispered urgently, Robert, think about it. If we had asked Dark to lend us credits back then, would it have been easy? Robert was taken aback. Ah, this. Let's use an analogy. Vert said. If I have 10 credits and someone asks to borrow 5, I'd definitely be reluctant. But what if I had 1,000 credits? But we hadn't even spoken to him back then. Robert protested. That's not the point. Vert argued. It's just like your analogy earlier. It's like us seeing stray cats or dogs and casually tossing them some food. Robert pleaded, Vert, promise me, please don't be so self-deprecating, okay? Vert fell silent again. Robert added, actually, if we had managed to borrow the money then, we might have lost even more in the long run. So don't dwell on it. Right. Vert agreed. After a short while, Vert and Robert approached Dark once more. Dark was initially thinking that asking someone to lend you credits just so you could duel them sounded incredibly foolish, and maybe they should just reschedule for tomorrow. But Vert struck a pose that screamed, I'm ready. Bring it on. With a sigh, Dark transferred 1 credit to him. Borrowing money just to give it right back. Some people are really strange, Dark mused. Alright then. Dark began. Where should we duel? The dueling hall? Vert quickly waved his hands. Too many people there. How about finding a quiet corner of the castle? Dark nodded. That works too. So, the three of them headed to an isolated corner on the castle's first floor. There was no shortage of such unnoticed spots within the castle walls. Robert stepped forward. I'll be the referee. The duel format will be a variation of Elite Mode. Only one magical spirit can be used. If the magical spirit is defeated, the duelist loses. Using the Academy cards as proof, the wager is 100 credits. Do both sides agree? No objections. X2 and so, the contract was formed. The details were recorded on all three of their Academy cards. Dark, wanting to test Shuckle's skills anyway, selected its card. Vert, naturally, had his troll card ready, brimming with confidence. Although he had told Robert that winning or losing didn't matter during their discussion, how could he truly harbor such a pathetic thought? If it's a duel, you fight to win. The two duelists created a distance of about 5 meters between them, each holding a magical spirit card. Robert suddenly shouted, "Battle countdown. 3, 2, 1, begin." They entered the battle phase directly. The expressions on Dark's and Vert's faces changed almost simultaneously. In my name, magical summoning. Come forth, Shuckle. Dark swiped his card smoothly, completing the standard summon in just 6 seconds. Shuckle, which hadn't drawn a breath of fresh air since its creation, materialized as it landed, a tiny spirit that showed absolutely no sign of being powerful on the surface. Roar. A fraction of a second later, the troll summoned by Vert slammed onto the ground, letting out a deafening roar directed at Shuckle. The stench erupting from its mouth seemed to warp the very air, sending ripples outwards. Though also a 3-star magical spirit, this nearly 4-meter tall troll boasted very balanced and powerful stats across the board. Card name, Troll, Type, Spirit Card, Level, Comma Race, Demi-Human, Attribute, Normal, Magic Power, 1200, Attack, 1500, Defense, 1400, Ultimate Skill, Sacrificial Slam. Its attack stat reached the maximum for a typical 3-star spirit, and its magic power and defense were far from weak. It was a standard tournament staple, thoroughly analyzed by magisters. Standard didn't imply weakness, on the contrary, it was synonymous with strength. It saw frequent play in duels precisely because it was powerful and easy to use. As a normal attribute spirit, the troll had almost no weaknesses, making it an excellent choice for bulking up a card deck. Furthermore, its ultimate skill, Sacrificial Slam, could inflict massive damage on the enemy at the cost of having its own maximum magic power. As the troll displayed its overwhelming might, both Vert and Robert couldn't help but show expressions of excitement. Go, troll. At Vert's command, the troll immediately stomped forward on its thick legs, closing the distance to the ant-like Shuckle in just 2 or 3 strides. Then, it raised its massive foot high and brought it crashing down. Boom. Dust and debris flew everywhere. Did I win? Chapter 78, Dark Demon Teases Fate, 8. Vert watched with excitement, certain the little red turtle couldn't possibly withstand the giant's stomp. But 3 seconds later, the sluggish giant suddenly let out a gurgling, wretched cry. Under the watchful eyes of the 3 humans, it violently jerked its foot up, clutching it, and started hopping on the spot like a rabbit. Judging by the cold sweat pouring down its face and its incessant screaming, the pain seemed agonizingly real. Right in the center of its right sole, there was a deep, blood-red, spherical indentation. Yet Shuckle, despite being forcefully stopped, nonchalantly poked its tentacle-like head out of its shell, chirping, "Shuck shuck." Roar. Provoked and humiliated, the giant's eyes began to fill with a blood-red hue. Thick, pulsing veins bulged at its temples. Its gaze towards Shuckle turned sinister. Without waiting for Vert's command, the giant abruptly raised its long arms, clenched its massive fists tightly, then leaped high, landing in a crouch, upper body bent low as it brought both fists smashing down. Crash. Shuckle bounced under the impact. But its ability to retract into its shell was exceptionally fast, not a single scratch appeared on the hard, red carapace. Outside the dueling field, Vert and Robert had never witnessed such raw violence up close. Robert stood dumbfounded, his duties as referee completely forgotten. Vert fared slightly better, but he too was stunned into silence. He only knew one thing, this was his giant. Powerful, dependable, invincible. Crash. 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 The giant hammered relentlessly, striking Shuckle again and again. Only Dark, standing opposite, could see that the edges of the giant's palms were already alarmingly red and swollen. But unlike before, when it had cried out in agony, the giant now seemed to have entered a mild berserk state. In this frenzy, it had clearly lost its sense of pain, repeating the futile attacks over and over. Yes. In Vert's eyes, his giant was brave and invincible. From Dark's perspective, however, it was just being a dimwit. Shuckle was so small, so light, with an attack power of 0, wouldn't grabbing and throwing it be more effective? Why insist on hammering? Then again, giants were known for their stupidity, so perhaps it was understandable. Dark watched on, his expression calm and steady. He recalled learning from his textbooks, the attack and defense stats shown on magical spirit cards were useful references, but only references. Depending on its specific condition, different parts of a magical spirit, and its various attack methods, would all possess different offensive and defensive values. Take Shuckle, for instance. Only its incredibly hard shell could truly reach that peak defense of 2,200, its actual body was quite fragile. And even then, not every single spot on the shell boasted a 2,200 defense rating. Every powerful magus knew the true capabilities of their magical spirits intimately, like the back of their hand, and excelled at showcasing their greatest strengths in battle. Now, under the giant's relentless assault, the varying strengths and weaknesses of Shuckle's defense were being revealed, bit by bit. After a full minute of continuous pounding, Shuckle remained unharmed. Far from being discouraged, however, the giant only grew more frenzied. Enough, giant. Use your hands, grab it. Vert, finally snapping out of his ecstatic trance after a full minute, managed to calm down. He hastily shouted what he thought was the best possible command. Hearing the command, the giant froze for half a second, then spread its swollen red hand and brought it slapping down. Power split. Dark's voice finally rang out. Little Shuckle, having passively endured the beating for over a minute, instantly snapped open its sharp eyes. As the giant's palm descended, the power between the two combatants was completely equalized. Then, Shuckle raised one small foot upwards, successfully blocking the giant's massive slap. The scene froze in that instant, giving the impression of a single hand holding up the heavens. The giant panted heavily, huff. Huff, its face growing even more ferocious. Giant, sacrificial. Seeing the giant was truly getting nowhere against Shuckle, Vert made a snap decision, ordering it to use its ultimate move, Sacrificial Crash. This time, however, the giant abruptly spun around. Its blood-red eyes glared menacingly at its master, an uncontrollable, ferocious ore radiating outwards. A chill ran down Vert's spine. His voice caught in his throat, the command dying unfinished. From the side, Dark casually asked, Vert, does your giant have some kind of berserk skill? Berserk? No way, it's just a blue rarity card. Vert raised his hand, then his expression changed drastically. The giant magical spirit card, which normally glowed blue, was now unexpectedly encircled by a purple aura. And the feedback he received after infusing mana now clearly listed a berserk skill. Not good. His heart skipped a beat. The giant had gone completely berserk. Roar. It spread its arms wide, its face terrifying. Its cavernous mouth gaped open, revealing a set of jagged, sharp fangs. Then, it abruptly turned its head towards Robert, who was standing at the edge of the field. Perhaps bullying the weak and fearing the strong truly is instinct. Even completely lost to berserk, the giant instinctively pinpointed the weakest target, Robert. Robert could never have imagined that simply standing by as referee would lead to such disaster. Fear etched on his face, he fumbled with his card pack, managing to draw his magical beast, Fortress, but his lips trembled so much he couldn't even manage a basic summoning chant. But the giant gave him no time. A massive shadow fell over Robert, blotting out his vision. His pupils dilated rapidly, utterly paralyzed by the bloodthirsty, ferocious ore radiating from the berserk giant. Escape was impossible. Vert, he stammered, backing against the wall, tears welling up. Robert, don't worry. I'll recall it right now. Vert frantically shook the giant magical spirit card, trying desperately to force the giant back into it. But his call went unanswered. With a sweep of its arm, the giant snatched Robert up in its massive hand. But just as it reared back to throw him, fate, or rather, the giant's heel, was caught. Tiny little Shuckle, as if using a crane to lift a car, had lifted the giant's heel with one small foot. Thrown off balance, the giant stumbled forward, crashing headfirst into the wall. Robert felt the grip loosen and scrambled away, darting past Dark in his haste. Dark watched the giant with amusement, a sudden thought striking him. Wasn't this scene straight out of the first Harry Potter book, the one that cemented the trio's friendship? And was he now standing in for Emma, Hermione, playing a part in this borrowed, read, plagiarized scenario? But he quickly shook his head. This was supposed to be a normal world, without any so-called plot inertia. Everyone's destiny was their own. This situation was likely just a coincidence, nothing more. Shuckle, transformed into a powerhouse with 2,200 attack thanks to Power Trick, held fast to the giant's toes. Chapter 79, The exquisite uses of the shackle. 9. Reduced to a mere 750 attack, the giant, despite its still imposing size and terrifying aura, was nothing but scrap metal before Shuckle's 2200 attack. Humphrey. With a grunt like a weightlifter's, Shuckle grabbed the giant's toes and gave it a mighty heave, sending it spiraling through the air before slamming hard against the wall. Truly, as expected of Street Marion's castle. Even after such a horrific impact, the wall remained perfectly intact, merely trembling slightly as a bit of dust trickled down. But the giant was plastered against it, limbs spread wide in a shape. Its head took the brunt of the impact, and it was visibly knocked clean out of its berserk state. Finally unable to resist Vert's card recall any longer, it was forcefully withdrawn. At the same time, the faint glow around Shuckle quickly faded. Shuckle possessed 4 skills. Aside from its passive ability, Sturdy, each active skill cost 100 mana and had a very short duration. Furthermore, its total mana pool was only 900, and its skills also had cooldowns. This meant that under normal circumstances, Shuckle could typically only land one powerful blow. But still, for a commonly summonable 3-star magical spirit, it was truly worthy of its gold card status. Dark recalled it with immense satisfaction. Vert, however, stood there, his face pale with anger and disbelief. No one could have predicted things would turn out this way. Deeply blaming himself, Vert rushed over to Robert's side, anxiously asking if he was hurt. Robert was relatively lucky. Aside from being shaken up, he was unharmed. Seeing Robert cling to Vert, nearly bursting into tears, Dark couldn't help but shake his head and prepare to leave. As for the duel bet, he wasn't exactly one to strictly follow school rules anyway. But he had only taken a few steps when Vert called out to him. Gritting his teeth, Vert insisted, "You win this round, but I'll win next time." Dark simply nodded along. "Good luck with that." Vert's expression faltered for a moment, but he still transferred the 100 points, adding that he owed the remaining 1 point and would pay it back tomorrow morning. Only after Dark turned his back and started walking away did Robert, having recovered slightly, quickly remind Vert. Vert then slowly drew the Forbidden Love card and pointed it briefly at the back of Dark's head. Dark felt a prickle of awareness but pretended not to notice, gradually disappearing around the corner. "Well? How did it go?" Robert asked, wiping his eyes. Vert showed him the Forbidden Love card. The favorability rating displayed on it was still 45. Robert gasped, "It didn't work?" Vert nodded, his face still grim. "Maybe my performance wasn't good enough. Damn it, I can't even control my own magical spirit. How can I be such a failure?" Robert asked quizzically, "Arguing yourself now?" Vert. "Could you maybe not say that out loud?" "Just as I thought." Pausing briefly around the corner, Dark then continued on his way. Vert's true objective matched his suspicions closely. Thinking about it carefully, it was rather baffling. However, being able to easily detect the prying gaze on the back of his head proved that his practice of the Psyshade technique was progressing well much faster than Professor Kazel had predicted, at least. He believed it wouldn't be long before he fully mastered this secret art for refining mental power. By then, he wouldn't have to worry about being spied on by Forbidden Love. In truth, Forbidden Love had very little effect on him, he merely saw it as a potential future threat. In a world where methods for prying into someone's mind existed, he had to be prepared. The Psyshade technique was just a basic countermeasure, he would need to find stronger methods later on. Back in his dormitory, Dark first experimented with the influence of the Great Sin series magic cards on Shuckle. There was an effect, but apart from a noticeable boost in its intelligence level, it didn't undergo any definitive changes in abilities like Evie had. Dark speculated this stemmed from the unique nature of magical beast, Evie. Not all magical spirits possessed the inherent potential for transformation like Evie. Of course, it was also possible that Shuckle wasn't compatible with Pride, or Rapture, or simply that its potential for change was already maxed out. After recording the experimental data, Dark continued his research into mental aspects. Around 8:30 p.m., he suddenly stopped writing and sketched a Shuckle in his notebook. Next to the Shuckle, he drew several fruits. Right, no wonder I felt like I was forgetting something. A spirit like Shuckle, besides combat, has another very important ability. Inside its pot-like shell, it can dissolve stored berries and ferment them into a delicious, viscous berry juice. That juice even has the special property of restoring stamina. Considering the unique nature of berries themselves, this world might not have the exact same berries as the Pokemon world, but perhaps substituting other fruits could still yield some decent juice. His curiosity piqued, Dark glanced at the large pile of fruits sitting in the corner. He had bought them all while collecting flower cards and was worried he wouldn't be able to eat them all himself. Perfect for an experiment. Naturally, since this was an experiment, he couldn't just randomly stuff fruits inside. Dark sorted the fruits by type, first apples, then oranges, then pears. Those were the ones he had bought. Let's start with apples. Enthusiastically, Dark took out the Shuckle magic card and performed a normal summon. Shuckle shell had 8 holes, perfect for inserting fruits. If they didn't fit, he'd just cut them into pieces. Dark inserted pieces of cut apple into one of the holes. Shuckle, its intelligence level now boosted above 3.0, immediately began to wiggle its body, rubbing against Dark's hand. Good boy. Dark soothed it gently. Understanding his intent, Shuckle retracted its body into its shell and began rapidly dissolving and fermenting the apple pieces. In less than 5 minutes, the equivalent of 3 apples had been successfully fermented into delicious apple juice. Dark thanked Shuckle, temporarily recalled it to its magic card to replenish its mana, and simultaneously summoned Demedevaman. Demedevaman flew down from its perch, eyeing the 3 glasses of apple juice placed on the table. For once, it actually showed a look of craving. As a familiar, it didn't strictly need to eat. Regular returns to its branch card to replenish mana were sufficient. However, its other half being a Digimon did grant it the ability to eat. Pick one and try it. Dark tempted it. The Demedevaman immediately lowered its head to the nearest glass and downed the entire cup of apple juice in one go. How is it? Dark asked keenly. Demedevaman squinted, savoring the taste for a moment before replying, I feel like my mind feels much clearer. In any case, it was confirmed non-toxic. Dark picked up a glass himself and tasted it carefully. Then, his mind, weary from hours of reading, felt surprisingly refreshed and re-energized. So it really does refresh the mind? How very apple-like. Chapter 80 Dark Demon enters the dormitory for the first time. Apples possess high nutritional value, rich in minerals and vitamins. They are neutral in nature, sweet and slightly sour in taste, capable of quenching thirst, clearing heat, relieving restlessness, and aiding digestion. Of course, they also have a subtle effect of nourishing the brain and blood, calming the nerves, and promoting sleep. However, after being processed by Shuckle, this particular effect was amplified slightly. There are quite a few magic potions with similar functions, but one made solely from an apple, and tasting this delicious? Such a potion surely couldn't exist naturally. It was at this moment Dark suddenly realized that the Shuckle bugs in this world probably didn't possess the ability to juice. Otherwise, there should be juice stalls lining the streets. I'll find a chance to check the library tomorrow. Dark thought. He continued his experiments. This time, he used oranges. 3 oranges yielded 3 glasses of orange juice. Demedevaman drank one first as a sign of respect. Then, its face turned slightly green, and it rushed into the bathroom. After the sound of flushing water, it emerged looking refreshed and invigorated. Dark decided not to touch the other 2 glasses of orange juice. Finally, he placed 3 pears into Shuckle's shell, allowing them to quickly dissolve and ferment. The resulting 3 glasses of pear juice had a sweet and refreshing aroma. Without needing any command from Dark, Demedevaman downed 1 glass in a single gulp. It then suddenly squinted, standing still on the spot, savoring the taste for a long while. Dark asked, how is it? Only then did Demedevaman speak, society has grown cold, hasn't it? Dark. He picked up a glass of pear juice and took a sip. Indeed, he felt a cool, icy sensation in his throat, and a peculiar freshness spread through his chest. Clearing heat and reducing internal fire, soothing coughs and moistening the lungs? It has that rock sugar and pear soup vibe. So, Dark wrote in his notebook, apple juice, brain boosting and refreshing. Orange juice, aids digestion and stimulates appetite. Pear juice, cools the body and clears the lungs. Why do I feel like an old traditional Chinese medicine doctor? After writing, Dark chuckled to himself. Shuckle's ability was truly formidable, capable of fermenting various fruits into juices with special effects. However, the fruits used for experiments so far were ordinary ones, and the special effects extracted weren't particularly strong. This weekend, he could go to Traveler's Street to pick some fruits that inherently possess special effects and ferment them. Perhaps he could obtain juices comparable to magic potions. Additionally, the fruit that the catnip grass was about to bear seemed like it could be fermented too. These were all points worth considering. After summarizing his findings, Dark nodded with satisfaction, then looked at the remaining 4 glasses of juice. Seems like Rose mentioned she has poor digestion, probably from eating too much beef with Diana. Diana gets sleepy when reading at night, and eating too much beef can also cause internal heat. Perfect, 2 glasses each. Without much further thought, Dark found a tray, placed the 4 glasses of juice on it, and headed out the door. Diana's room was number 233, and Rose's was 234, both easy to remember. It was Dark's first time entering the female dormitory area. He couldn't help but feel that even the floors seemed a bit cleaner than in the male dorms. Fortunately, it was already past 9 in the evening, and the corridor was completely deserted. Dark arrived at room 233 first and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" came a soft, gentle voice from inside. "It's me." A. Dark waited outside the door for a short while before Diana opened it, her face flushed red. She looked up at Dark and whispered, "It's so late, why did you suddenly decide to come over?" Dark gave a faint smile, lowering the tray slightly. "I made a few extra glasses of juice." Is that so?" Diana twisted a corner of her nightgown with her fingers and stepped back slightly, opening the door a crack wider. "Then, come in. Is it appropriate?" Dark hadn't originally planned on going in, but since he was here, he might as well sit for a bit. After all, she was one of his closer friends at the academy. Although the dorm rooms were of the same standard size, Diana's room felt visually much narrower than Dark's. She must have spent a significant amount of academic credits decorating it. Not only was the wall covered in pink wallpaper, but the corners and shelves were also filled with teddy bears of various sizes. A black and white bear wearing a bow on one ear was particularly conspicuous. Isn't that Diana's familiar?" Dark glanced at the panda familiar, which had been forced into a flowery dress, and suddenly felt he treated Demi Deviman rather well. At least it didn't have to wear a dress. Dark put the tray down, selected a glass of orange juice and apple juice, and moved them to the desk. A half-finished exercise book lay on the desk. It seemed Diana had just been engaged in a fierce battle with it. "Orange juice aids digestion and appetite, but drink it sparingly. Apple juice, refreshing and helps clear the mind. Drink some if you feel sleepy." Diana leaned over and sniffed them, then handed the orange juice back to Dark. "I don't need this." Dark, "All right, fair enough." Then, Diana picked up the apple juice and downed it in one go. A moment later, her eyes lit up, and she suddenly felt her mind become much clearer. It's here. It's here. The focus is back." Dark smiled slightly. "Want some pear juice? Clears heat and reduces internal fire." Hee. Diana's eyes darted around, and she pointed next door. "Give it to Rose, she's really suffering from internal heat right now." Dark nodded. "All right, I'll head over then." Diana, "Okay." So, Dark knocked on Rose's door. Rose opened the door, poked her head out, and upon seeing Dark, invited him in as well. She was wearing a white nightgown, her lower abdomen slightly distended, and her lips were chapped, clear signs she had indeed eaten too much beef and hadn't digested it yet. Dark left the orange juice and pear juice with her. After returning to his dorm, Dark looked at the last remaining glass of orange juice, contemplated whether to drink it or not, and finally chose to drink it. It actually worked. He felt considerably refreshed after coming out of the bathroom. The apple and pear juices are good stuff. I should keep some on hand in the future. The calendar page turned. During Tuesday's first period, the dueling class, Professor Jones learned that the first-year students had all refined new magic spirits the day before. She randomly selected a few students to come up on stage for demonstration duels. With a wide variety of new magic spirits, the duels between students were indeed much more interesting to watch than when they only had phantom beasts. Someone suggested holding another in-class tournament like the last one. However, Professor Jones stated that the time was not yet right. Magic spirit cards were just the largest category among the 5 major types of magic cards. The next in-class tournament would be held after the vast majority of students had created their first magic card or item card. As for field cards and ritual cards, those belonged to extremely advanced content, and she didn't expect the first-year students to learn them within the first semester. After this class ended, Vert arrived as expected and returned the 1 academic credit owed from yesterday to Dark. The hero's son showed his usual diligence when it came to repaying debts. Dark accepted the 1 credit and also began considering how to create magic cards or item cards. Perhaps I can use the juices fermented by Shuckle as core materials. Chapter 81. No book is too difficult for Dark Demon. There was no need to wait for the professor's lectures. Once Dark had an idea, he headed straight to the library after his magic history class in the afternoon. Soon, he knew exactly where to find it, a book titled Pierre Explains Personally How to Refine Potions into Magic Cards. Pierre was an incredibly famous potioneer in magical history. From his perspective, there wasn't a potion that couldn't be refined into a magic card. The explanatory book was a daunting 3 fingers thick, enough to make anyone hesitate. Forget first-year students, even among the upper years, few had the courage to take it down from the shelf. After retrieving it, Dark suddenly remembered another question he needed to resolve. He temporarily placed the book on a reading room table, using his shoulder bag to claim the spot, and then went back into the stacks to search again. Quickly, He found an illustrated guide to insect species and flipped through it until he found the description for the shuckle bug. The book's description was rather brief, but it generally covered the essential points. In this world, the shuckle bug didn't actually exist in reality. It was a rare magic spirit that could only be successfully created through accidental refinement. In fact, the vast majority of shuckle bugs were white cards, possessing no skills. The even rarer blue card versions, at most, possessed the passive skill, Sturdy. There had never been any record of skills like Power Trick. The card name for the shuckle bug was simply Shuckle Bug, differing by one character from Dark's Shuckle. Perhaps it was this single character difference that gave these two magic spirits, identical in appearance and stats, entirely different forms of life. Combined with the activation of the Sins series magic cards, it resulted in Shuckle gaining the special ability to ferment fruit into juice. In other words, his Shuckle was absolutely unique. Having resolved the doubt in his mind, Dark returned to the reading room, only to notice someone sitting at the seat he had claimed, flipping through the incredibly long titled Pierre Explains Personally. He walked over and tapped lightly on the desk. Ahem. Emma looked up at him, then silently closed the book and returned to her own seat. Dark pretended nothing had happened and began to pore over the book himself. The book started by clearly explaining the difference between a potion and a potion that had been refined into a magic card. Potions refined into magic cards would be categorized as either magic cards or item cards based on their form, but their actual effects wouldn't differ greatly. Existing potions were generally single-use. Once drunk, they were gone. Refined into a magic card, however, they became reusable potion cards. But potion cards had drawbacks. Their effects were weakened and not long-lasting. For instance, a potion that restored 10 magic points per second might, when refined into a potion card, only restore 10 magic points total upon a single use. The advantages of potion cards were their convenience in use and transport, and their reusability. Of course, the rarer the potion, the higher the difficulty in refining it into a potion card. Without sufficient skill, one might even end up losing everything invested. For magisters wanting to use potions in duels, refining them into potion cards was a necessity. Learning to refine potion cards was something every magister had to go through. Starting that afternoon, Dark began to slowly work his way through the book, temporarily setting aside other matters. However, Diana, having developed a taste for it, started shamelessly coming to him daily to ask for apple juice, while Rose developed a keen interest in pear juice. Apple juice could boost mental clarity and refresh the mind, making it suitable as a study drink, plus it tasted good. Dark found Diana's requests for apple juice completely understandable. But what was the deal with pear juice? He knew it could reduce internal heat, but surely Rose wasn't overheating every single day? It wasn't until Rose told him that reducing internal heat and toxins prevents acne that enlightenment dawned. But did that really work? Dark admitted he didn't understand. A person's scope of knowledge has its limits, and he didn't pursue the matter further. In the blink of an eye, it was Friday. After the morning dueling class, students once again looked forward to their trip to Traveler Street. With only a week left until Halloween Eve, more people began focusing on their costumes for the masquerade ball. Upper year students were even starting to arrange partners for the dance. The Halloween ball wasn't typically as romantic or atmospheric as the Christmas ball, especially with the traditional ghost-catching activity, so it hadn't been very popular among couples in the past. But this time was different. The planned attendance of the kingdom's princess elevated the ball's tone from a quirky costume event to another dimension entirely. Some students even declared on the spot that they would absolutely wear their most formal attire to this masquerade, transforming into the prince most suited for the princess, aiming for a dance with her. How he was subsequently ridiculed is another story. In any case, the comical and bizarre costumes were no longer as popular as last year. Instead, sets like the Vampire series, Knight series, and Royal Court series, which showcased the wearer's handsome features and charisma, became more sought after. The increasingly romantic atmosphere also sparked other ideas among the male and female students. They began searching for dance partners. The first-year students lacked the foresight of the upper years. Their own frenzy would likely erupt in a few more days. Dark entered Traveler Street at this time, but he was looking for suitable fruits to use as materials. Traveler Street did have fruit stores, but they were the kind that just sold ordinary pears and apples. He would, of course, buy some apples and pears to take back, but his main objective now was fruits with special effects. For example, the legendary dragon saliva fruit. Just kidding. Even if it existed, Dark couldn't afford it. He first visited the Wind Traveler materials shop. But not long after, he walked out again. Wind Traveler indeed had various materials, but concerning fruits, they only had dried fruit. And as everyone knows, dried fruit has no juice. After leaving Wind Traveler, Dark wandered the street for a while before entering the Cuckoo's Garden flower and plant shop where he had previously bought the bug tree. Buying fruit at a flower shop? It might sound unreliable. But in the golden autumn season, quite a few plants in the shop had indeed borne fruit. The plump auntie who owned the shop clearly remembered the first-year student who could afford a bug tree. When Dark asked, she smiled and said, "I can sell them, sure, but the fruit is part of the plant's value. If you buy the fruit, won't my plants become unsellable?" Dark smiled back. "But when fruits ripen, they eventually need to be picked. I only need to buy one or two that have been picked, or have fallen off." The plump auntie replied, "There aren't many like that. Perhaps they aren't what you're looking for?" Dark said, "Can I take a look?" Chapter 82 Dark Demon becomes the fruit farmer old father. 10. The plump auntie clearly showed some favoritism towards Dark. But then again, how could anyone not like a first-year student like him, eager to learn, well-mannered, and with such a cute, handsome face? She waved Dark over and headed towards the counter. When Dark reached the counter, he saw her lift a basket up from underneath. This basket wasn't large. Counting carefully, there were only 5 fruits inside. Dark hadn't studied plants beyond his immediate needs, so he couldn't tell what kind of flowers or trees these fruits came from. But there's no shame in not knowing. Pretending to know is what's truly shameful. So he asked curiously, "Auntie, what plants do these fruits come from, and what effects do they have?" The plump auntie reached into the basket, nudged 3 of the fruits together, and said, "These 3 are fruits from the singing tree." The singing tree was a type of stump bonsai that chirped when sunlight hit it at an angle. It was said to be a perfect green alarm clock to keep in a dorm room. But this was the first Dark had heard that singing trees could bear fruit. These 3 singing tree fruits were only about the size of longans, looking like 3 large blueberries. But what special effects did singing tree fruits have? Could they teach someone how to chirp? Dark looked up at the plump auntie. The plump auntie smiled. "You first years probably haven't learned this yet, but singing tree fruits are actually one of the core materials for silencing cards. They can absorb sound waves." Dark thought for a moment, puzzled. That doesn't seem right. If the fruits absorb sound waves, wouldn't the singing tree stop making noise after it bears fruit? The plump auntie shook her head. Quite the opposite. After bearing fruit, the singing tree's calls become even clearer. They absorb sound waves, store them up, and then release them in bursts. Dark was still confused, but the plump auntie clearly wasn't going to elaborate further. She took one of the 2 remaining fruits and placed it on the countertop. This fruit looked like a pineapple but was only palm-sized. The plump auntie said, "This is the fruit of the spiral tree." Dark looked completely baffled. "Spiral tree? What kind of tree is that?" The plump auntie pointed to a small tree in the shop. Dark looked over. It was a strange little tree with a spiraling trunk. Its leaves curled like wind chimes, and as they gently spun in the breeze, they actually made a sound like wind chimes. "So why don't you just call it a wind chime tree?" The plump auntie explained. Applying the leaves of the spiral tree behind the ears effectively prevents dizziness. The best-selling motion sickness patches nowadays use spiral tree leaves as the main ingredient. Its fruit, however, does the exact opposite. It can make a person feel drunk without alcohol, making the world spin. Dark immediately became interested in this pineapple-like spiral tree fruit. The plump auntie then picked up the last fruit. It was a translucent fruit, about the size of a tangerine. Looking closely, one could even see the pit inside. The plump auntie said, "This is the fruit of the insect tree." Dark was startled. "Insect trees can bear fruit?" "Of course." The plump auntie explained with a smile. "But it requires very special cultivation methods to produce fruit. Its fruits are extremely rare. They can store temporary human memories, which can be released by infusing just a little magic. It's a natural memory orb. 3 singing tree fruits, 1 spiral tree fruit, 1 insect tree fruit. 5 fruits in total. Among them, the singing tree fruits were the cheapest, costing only 10 credits each. The spiral tree fruit was a bit more expensive, at 30 credits. As for the insect tree fruit, its price was equivalent to half an insect tree. Although Dark had credits, he couldn't just spend them recklessly. In the end, he didn't buy the insect tree fruit, spending only 60 credits on the other 4 fruits. The main reason was that he couldn't imagine what extra effects the insect tree fruit might have after being fermented into juice. If he wanted to store memories, wasn't there a perfectly good insect tree planted right there? Getting an insect tree fruit seemed redundant. On the other hand, the singing tree and spiral tree fruits seemed quite useful. After leaving the Goo Goo Bird flower and tree shop, Dark resumed his browse. Many areas of Traveler Street weren't actually open to first-year students. This was mainly because first years didn't yet have a solid understanding of magicraft. Exposing them to too many dangerous things would do more harm than good. Dark wandered around and eventually found a magic potion shop. The magic potion shop sold not only ready-made potions but also some materials for potion making, which naturally included fruits and herbs. Moreover, the fruits here were clearly priced and came with detailed information. Inside, Dark picked out several white wood fruits and Bleach fruits. White wood fruit was one of the core materials for making healing salves. And Bleach fruit was a raw material for making mana recovery potions. In Professor Thompson's Magicraft class, Dark had used Bleach fruit to make both swift mana potions and mana recovery potions. He even still had the potions made during those two classes stored back in his dorm. Once he learned how to refine potions into Magicraft cards, he planned to experiment with those two potions first. White wood fruits and Bleach fruits were both 20 credits each, a discounted price for students. He bought 5 of each. Dusk was approaching, the sky dimming slightly. Dark headed back, laden with bags big and small, a fruitful trip. There were many others around him returning similarly loaded, though mostly with candy, snacks, clothes, and jewelry. Of course, there were also outliers like Emma, who had 2 poor otters helping her carry 2 mountains of books. When Dark returned to the castle, he happened to run into Diana, who had eaten her fill and was about to go check out the night stalls with Rose. Dark had just started to speak when Diana quickly interjected, "Done, the homework's all done." Well, nothing more to say then. Dark watched their retreating figures, feeling like a benevolent old father. Back in his dorm, Dark sorted and put away his haul, taking about half an hour. Only then did he summon Shuckle, fermented a cup of apple juice, and took a small sip. Feeling slightly refreshed, Dark eagerly took out the singing tree fruits. He had 4 types of fruit in total. The effects of the white wood fruit and Bleach fruit were predictable, but the singing tree and spiral tree fruits held some mystery. He was quite curious about what effects these 2 types of fruit would produce if fermented into juice. He had 3 singing tree fruits, offering more room for error, making them perfect for the initial experiment. Unexpectedly, fermenting a single longan-sized singing tree fruit took a full 15 minutes. To complete the fermentation of this singing tree fruit, Dark had to continuously replenish Shuckle's magic. When it finally succeeded, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then, a smile spread across his face as he looked towards the demi-devilman that was preparing to sneak away. Chapter 83 Demi-devilman crying and sniffling. 11. A single chirping fruit, about the size of a longan, could only produce a tiny cup of juice through dissolution and fermentation. The juice was a deep blue, not looking like something a person should drink. Fortunately, Demi-devilman wasn't human. Dark couldn't help but feel a sliver of relief. Forced to fly back, Demi-devilman lowered its head and cautiously took a sip of the juice in a small cup. A hint of sweetness. With that thought, Demi-devilman unconsciously drank the entire cup of chirping fruit juice down to the last drop. "How do you feel?" Dark's belated concern deeply moved Demi-devilman. It turned back, trying to speak, but only managed a series of strained noises. Dark asked, perplexed, "What are you saying?" Demi-devilman. "Dark?" Demi-devilman. "Dark, just say it." Demi-devilman. "Dark, how am I supposed to know what you want to say if you don't say it?" Demi-devilman. In short, Demi-devilman couldn't make a sound. Dark, of course, realized the problem immediately. He glanced at the clock and noted the time. Without Demi-devilman, Dark naturally wouldn't conduct experiments haphazardly. He picked out a book and read for a while, only getting up to record the time when Demi-devilman suddenly let out a hoarse sob. "So, it lasts for about 8 minutes? Just as expected from one of the ingredients for silence cards, huh? If I use this juice following the method for creating potion cards, could I find a new path, create an alternative kind of silence card?" Among the first-year students, there wasn't a single one who didn't envy Professor Self's silence card. That commanding presence, silencing everyone with a wave of her hand, it was just too cool. Unfortunately, crafting the silence card was a technique learned only by upperclassmen. The requirements, whether for technical difficulty or material quality, were extremely high. Among the first years, even Dark knew his limits and hadn't even considered attempting that level of refinement. However, now, it seemed he might have a chance. At this thought, Dark carefully stored away the remaining 2 chirping fruits. While chirping fruits weren't expensive, most available on Traveler Street were processed dried fruits. Finding fresh ones meant trying his luck again at the plant shop. Next, Dark luxuriously took out a spiral fruit worth 30 credits each to experiment with. The fermentation of the spiral fruit also took about 15 minutes. Luckily, Dark possessed refined mana restoration methods, otherwise, he really wouldn't have been able to brew it. The spiral fruit juice displayed a strange black and white mottled hue. When stirred gently, it would begin to swirl. A single spiral fruit ultimately fermented into a full cup of juice. Looking at the single cup of black and white juice, Dark thought for a moment, then still decided to scoop up a bit with a silver spoon and offer it to Demi Deviman. Dark, say ah. Demi Deviman, ah. Down went the spoonful. With a stretch of its claws, Demi Deviman spiraled towards the ceiling. Dark reached out and poked its belly, and it started giggling. Relieved, Dark asked, how is it? Anything unusual? Demi Deviman, hee hee hee. Dark, Demi Deviman, hee hee hee. Alright, this time, it was the ears. Dark felt like he had probably discovered the secret of the spiral fruit. Demi Deviman's hearing impairment lasted for about 2 minutes before improving. Dark confirmed the effects of the 2 fruit juices, writing in his notebook, chirping fruit juice, unable to speak. Spiral fruit juice, hearing impairment. Drinking both juices together would make one deaf and mute. Dark looked at the cup of spiral fruit juice, wondering how best to preserve this stuff. Beyond that, he couldn't help but wonder, if these 2 juices were mixed, would the effects cancel each other out, or would they combine? Should I try it again? He acted on the thought immediately. Dark once again took out a chirping fruit and had Hu dissolve and ferment it into juice. Then, he took a spoonful from each juice, placed them into another small cup, and carefully mixed them. After the black and white juice merged with the deep blue juice, they surprisingly didn't blend colors, instead forming a wondrous tricolor liquid of black, white, and blue. Demi Deviman, forced to taste a mouthful, truly became a deaf and mute creature. The effect even seemed somewhat enhanced, lasting for a full 5 minutes. Understanding dawned on Dark. Afterward, looking at the remaining amounts of the 2 juices, he fermented the last chirping fruit into juice as well, so he could achieve a roughly 1:1 ratio. Then, he mixed these 2 juices thoroughly, sealed the container with a lid, and set it aside for the time being. It was already 8:30 p.m. Dark knew it was time to put his knowledge into practice. Without a suitable preservation method, neither juice would last long. The best approach was to strike while the iron was hot, turn them directly into potion cards. Of course, he wasn't old enough to use them for his very first potion card creation experiment. With white dried fruit and lanlan fruit on hand, it wasn't their turn yet. Anyway, the first step was to place either a white dried fruit or a lanlan fruit into Hu's shell. But just then, Dark, having just completed a small fusion, suddenly had another idea. Into Hu's shell, he placed 1 white dried fruit and 1 lanlan fruit together. These 2 fruits dissolved and fermented simultaneously within the shell, ultimately forming a mixed liquid. First, he used Pride Eye to induce pride in Demi Deviman, making it expend its mana by firing small darts. Only then did he scoop out a spoonful of the mixed juice and feed it to Demi Deviman. After consuming this spoonful of mixed juice, Demi Deviman indeed felt its mana rapidly recovering. As for the other half, the healing effect, it didn't manifest for the time being. However, this was already enough for Dark. He never expected to achieve everything in one go. Afterward, he took out a personal explanation by Pierre and opened it. Following the methods recorded in the book, he began the experiment step by step. There were numerous methods for refining potions into potion cards. Strictly speaking, each type of potion had its own distinct refinement method. What Dark was attempting was, naturally, the general method described within. To be more precise, it was the general method for refining a mana recovery potion into a potion card. Mimicking this method, substituting the mixed fruit juice for the mana recovery potion, that was Dark's current plan. The creation of potion cards was completely different from that of magical spirit cards. From the very beginning, it didn't require vitality culture mediums like spirit nectar or mind essence solution. Its core lay in a number 3 alchemy array known as the Dalton alchemy array. Dalton was a great archmage, second only to Merlin, who ushered in a new era of transforming potions into potion cards.